Hello, can you hear me there? Testing. Hello, can you hear me? Testing. Someone tell me in the comments if you can hear me. Testing again. Can you still hear me? Hello, anyone? Can you hear me? Okay, very good. As usual, I'm having technical issues here. So give me a sec and then we'll start up. There we go. How's everyone doing tonight? Hacksblade, I am firmly Gen X, but I have the technical skills of a boomer sometimes. I'm just so incompetent at anything to do with tech stuff. All right, so we'll give it a moment for any stragglers to come in. Before we formally begin. Cleaning out my pipes from earlier. All right, that'll have to do for now. Got a pipe here that needs some more heavy-duty treatment, but if I do that now, I'm never going to get to doing the actual show. Where's the cat? She's around. Both of my cats are around there. Who knows? They might pop in later. Though I don't know. They've been quite lazy lately. Just doing their own thing now that it's gotten hot here again. So they don't they might not show up. I don't know. I never force my cats to be on the program. Born Palinville. I have played Hardmaster. I don't particularly care for it as a system. Regarding the setting, I mean it's really quite good in terms of simulation of Dark Age / early medieval gaming. It is. There's no question about that. But it's I don't know. I think also it's its setting wank, for to use a term, is so kind of structured that it seems dull to me. I've never found it a very exciting setting. George Whittlebuck, Lorraine McLaren, Hoopy, no, Catboy, incredibly, is not dead yet, and he's only becoming more and more powerful. He's hooking up with the Lords of Neutrality now. Serious problem. Warduke, I don't know. I've never really seen that. The question, sorry, is in 5e, what do you think about the observation that monsters are generally not that challenging? I thought the monster manual for 5th edition, which I had almost nothing at all to do with, was really, really well done. And I like that that each individual monster has its own special sort of qualities, attacks or whatever special abilities that it has. It gave it a touch more distinction. So there was like stuff that defined differences in actual like combat styles between different types of, like, say, goblinoids or whatever. And I don't know. I've heard a lot of stories of 5th edition TPKs, because in 5th edition basically you either have a TPK or everyone lives, right? But 5th edition TPKs that are fairly that are caused by like fairly weakling type creatures, like kobolds, for example. Someone says, what do you think about Tucker's kobolds? Yeah, well, I think that every creature should not really be made in D&D to act as especially dangerous to the characters, or as like a way for the characters to get easy XP. Neither of those are what you should be doing. They should be immersive in the world, right? And of course, in the one, to try to protect themselves from attacks, right? And so they're going to try to use different clever tactics if they have the brain power for it, and you should reflect that. And anything that your players can kind of think up in terms of how to manipulate the rules of the game, if you presume that the setting is one where those are the rules of nature in that world, then anything clever any of your PCs have ever come up with, like in terms of using a spell or how to manipulate some kind of a combat rule to have it as a particular strategy in combat, well, your enemies, other people should have thought of that as well, right? Like it seems logical, because the world, if that's how it works in the world for the PCs, that's how it works for the monsters, and the PCs couldn't possibly be the first people in history to have figured out how to, like, abuse a spell or something like that. So that's my perspective on it. Give me one sec here. I'm gonna grab my pipe and then I'll be ready to formally begin. I see that questions are coming in like mad now, so I guess I'm gonna have to start answering them. But let me just fill up the pipe, and then we will actually start the live stream. But thanks to everybody who's come in early. All right, got my pipe ready. Lighten it up. All right, so let's start. Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss of internet shitlords. And this is a live stream. And I've called it RPG Pundit First Avenger because I had some people recently that were asking me about kind of the history of the RPG Pundit, right? I've just realized that maybe there's quite a lot of you guys that have not actually been following me for for 15 years and then may have come to get to know me only relatively recently through YouTube or what have you. So one of the things I'm going to try to talk about in this live stream, given enough time, is kind of the background of who is the RPG Pundit and where did he come from. But we're going to talk about other stuff too. We're going to answer questions, and there's a lot of questions that came in right off the bat. So I guess that's where we're going to begin with. I also wanted to talk about some like kind of vaguely political issues or social political issues as well. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to order this live stream in like inverse order of directly political chat versus gaming chat. So that, in other words, the gaming chat is going to come first, and as we proceed in the night, we will move slowly away from pure gaming chat and into politics chat. All right. So that way, the people that want the gaming chat, when they see that the tide is turning towards, talking about Turning Point USA or whatever, they can choose to leave if that's what they want. Because I know that not everyone is going to want to talk about that. So, start with the questions. George Whittlesbach, Lorraine McLarian Hoopy asks, what did Raggy mean with his Zach S module? Well, I assume you mean the one that says Zach did nothing wrong or something like that. And I tend to take people at their word, right? And, oh, hey, look at this. Hello. Hi. What's going on here? It's not Big Chungus, it's her sister. Was decided to like come and take a look at what we're doing. So I'm going to assume that James Raggy believes that Zach did nothing wrong. That would seem to me to be the most obvious position of estimating what James believes. Now, I don't believe he did nothing wrong. I know for a fact certain things that he's done very wrong. For one thing, his pandering to the SJW crowd, and in some ways, this feels like just desserts for Zach. But what I believe is that Zach S shouldn't be blacklisted. That people should have the choice. People should know if you know who he is, you should decide for yourself whether you support that or not. That's not anybody else's business to tell you you're not allowed to purchase from this guy, even if he did everything that they said he did, right? Even if he was like absolutely awful, if he was like Harvey Weinstein levels of awful, that doesn't mean that other people get to blacklist you and tell you what you can and can't gain, right? Like what you can and can't pay for on. Had a momentary connection failure there. I hope that everything that I mentioned actually got picked up there, but I'm trying to see if I can make some memory here or whatever. I don't know if this is my connection problem or not, but did you guys hear all that about what I said about Zach S? Anyway, moving on. Monkeywork says, what's your opinion on the black hack system? I think it's a shitty system. I'll put it very simply there. It's not a good system. It's just some stupid thing. People has this kind of allegedly badass attitude, but the guy who designed it is actually a rampant SJW, if you didn't know. So be wary of those products. Mr. Boyvin says, in the DCC, do you use the funny odd dice? Yes, I do. I do use the funny odd dice. Chris Donovan says, is anyone else getting partially muted audio? Please let me know if you are. I hope that it's not just I'm too far away from the mic. Maybe I'll move it over a bit. There, now I'm a bit closer. As you can see, I have a very high-tech operation here. Like, this is just the ultimate in technology. Lower this down a bit then. Like that. Yeah. There we go. All right, good enough. See if there are any more questions. Buried Axeblade says, why are there not furry dice yet? Do you mean fuzzy dice or do you mean furry dice? Because probably neither of those are a very good idea, but one is a much worse idea than others. um, Laser Blastoid says, I started following a few weeks ago, which is 15 years. Okay. How's your father said, I learned about you because RPG.net is so ban happy. Yes, yes, they are. Um, Desconocido in Spanish says, yo solo quiero ver al RPG Pandit destrozando los SJW y demás gentuza. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Desconocido 94. You know, I'm still supposed to have an interview for it's a well-known Argentinian podcast on RPGs, but it got stopped on account of the appointment got canceled on account of the person having various personal crises or something like that. The interviewer, not me. But well, we'll hope that we can get that in again soon for the Latino fans, and I do have quite a few of them, it seems. Okay, very very important question here. If who wrote so this? Chris Donovan said, if you roll to hit and a cat jumps on the table and influences the roll, is it a do-over? That's a very interesting question. I'll look forward to seeing what the audience says about it. From my point of view, if the cat jumps on the table and influences the roll, but the die stays on the table and ends up in a stable position, that is to say, not tipped over in some particular way, then it stands. If the cat knocks it off the table, then not so. Michael Herrera says, Pundit, do you have a Discord server? I don't. I tried to get into Discord. The kids wanted me to get into Discord, all the Zoomers and whatnot. but I just couldn't. It just wasn't in me, like I do have very occasionally there's the OSRG Discord server that I occasionally peek into. I have people that play in my DCC game that are on there. Great people, really good, huge fan. But it's just, to me, it's just a chat room, right? Like, I mean, on Mewe, I have groups. Like the Inglorious OSR is a group on Mewe that has discussion, it has files, and it has a chat room. So why do I want to go to something that's only a chat room? I just can't understand the direct appeal of Discord, Monkeywork says, I know you're saving the political discussions to the end, but wanted to put out the thought of maybe splitting your content a bit between gaming and political more often. I enjoy your gaming advice, but I enjoy games to escape the shit in the real world. I can understand people feeling that way. He says, regardless of political leanings that anyone has, I wish they would check them before picking up the dice. I just want a good time, not a lecture. But when I'm sitting at the gaming table, I totally agree. Like I've commented a lot of times here that in my gaming groups I have, some Latin American type socialists. I've got an outright Trotskyite. I've got some Euro socialists. Then I've got some guys that are like way more right wing than I am. It's like people that are that the SJWs would just be horrified by. And we all sit down together and game because nobody's there for the politics, right? In terms of my channel, though, I think a lot of the people that watch me want to hear me rant about politics. So what I do try to do is divide some of my videos between, ones that are dealing with current controversies in the D&D world, which are inevitably going to be political controversies, not because of me, but because the SJWs are introducing those political elements. And videos where I just talk about some kind of a subject, like I don't know, hit points or whatever, and generally those videos aren't political, right? And of course, inevitably, the ones that are about some kind of controversy or politics get way more views. But I'll do them both anyway. Mike M says, "What do you think about Genesis?" I'm not familiar with Genesis. Dungeon World. Well, Dungeon World is just kind of trash. It's Dungeon World is both the story gamers declaring surrender and recognizing that no one wanted to buy their shitty story games, and at the same time, it's story gamers trying to draw people into a pseudo story gaming style by tricking them into thinking they're buying an old school OSR style game when it's not, right? So that's what Dungeon World is about. Malwinus says, "Is there a Mallory-based Legend of King Arthur or Nibelungen-based source book for Lion and Dragon incoming?" Well, Malwinus, I don't think so. Specifically because Pendragon already kind of fills that niche. And, you know, the Great Pendragon campaign is one of the greatest campaign setting type books ever made, in my opinion. It's absolute genius. It was an inspiration in part for example, me including a timeline and list of characters and stuff like that in my Dark Albion setting book. Plus, really, you know, Mallory wasn't really writing about King Arthur, if you think about it. He was writing about the War of the Roses. He was a knight during the War of the Roses, right? And his deal was really about that. It was a commentary of sorts. I don't know why no one seems to get that. Anyway, I don't think I'm going to be doing that. I do think there are going to be Lion and Dragon source books in the future, setting books more accurately, that aren't just the Pundit Present books. And I think they'll probably, what they're going to be is there's a chance that I could do one on the Anarchy period. And one that I'm very, very tempted to do is about the Crusades, of course. And it'll probably be called Deus Volt. Warduke says, "Do you think the SJW agenda-driven climate pendulum of the RPGs D&D will ever swing back the other day?" I presume you meant the other way. Yes, I do think there's already a pushback happening now. I think inevitably the SJW crowds will end up becoming the losers of the larger culture war, and people will then stop listening to them and they'll stop having influence, especially over large corporations. And so when that happens, you're going to see a turnaround in that. And I think that, I don't know, I'm not sure if you mean it, you know, the other way, in the sense that you're going to have like a bunch of kind of pro-Trump propaganda in RPGs, but I wouldn't really want that anyways, right? All I want is for RPGs to go back to normal. Same as with movies and with comics and with science fiction. I think most of us feel that way, right? Monkeywork says, "For anyone who has the writing chops to do what RPG Pundit did for War of the Roses, a great time period that I think would work for the OSR is the saga period in Iceland." Yes, an Icelandic saga period sort of stuff with fantasy elements. That would probably be really cool, actually. Judd Goswick says, "Also looking forward to the sci-fi game using the Lion Dragon system." Well, that's more. It's good. I've got to tell you, it's more of a micro game, right? It is one of the RPG Pundit Presents issues, one of the larger ones, but still an RPG Pundit Presents issue. So it's mostly like character creation rules, skills, abilities, and combat rules, right? There's very little explicit setting in it. There's a lot of kind of implicit setting in it, which is kind of the implicit setting is a very generic space opera setting, right? And it's coming out. It's eventually. I'm going to talk a bit more about my current situation via publishing in a second here, but sooner or later there will be a number 100 of RPG Pundit Presents. Bodacious Bard says, "Hey Pundit, what do you think of Wilderness Hex Crawl style games? I like them, but there are risks involved in making them. That you have to be able to maintain the interest of the party, right? Like it has to be a sufficient you've got to be very clever in how you run it, or if you're talking about design, you have to design it in a way that is going to be really functional, because if not, it just becomes repetitive. Mr. Max Boyven says, I'd like to see a pro-Catholic RPG. Well, Mr. Max, I don't know if you've checked out Lion and Dragon. It is set in a Catholic setting, and it is, even though I don't go into, it doesn't have kind of a propagandistic side to it. I present the church as not evil, which is something that is already a huge difference from most representations of the medieval church in the modern era. I even made an RPG Pundit Present sourcebook called The Cult of the Saints, which is about including the veneration of saints and the prayer for the intervention of saints into your adventuring party, right? Like, and I use that in my current Lion and Dragon campaign. I've got like almost on any character in that campaign who is Christian, their character has a saint that they are praying to every goddamn day because they see the benefit of it, right? So it's very interesting how that's worked out. The ones they picked are interesting too. Like one of them is praying to Saint Germanus, and another one to, which was it, Saint Christopher. Anyway, very interesting stuff. Brian Renninger says a Dutch Revolt would be cool too. Yeah, that would be an interesting setting for Lion and Dragon. It would be a little bit post, like that point, you're already well past the medieval period, of course. So I don't know. Sam Rice says, I'd favor a Middle Eastern setting during the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate, where there's so much backstabbing. Well, if I do a Crusades setting, it's going to cover both sides, as you could say, right? Like there's going to be a lot of material, I'm sure, on the Muslim side, and the Sunni, Shia, and Ismaili factions thereof, and all of that, Monkeywork says, do you have any thoughts on the fantasy trip when SJG brought back came onto my radar? Monkeywork, check out the list of videos on my channel. If you go down there far enough, you will find an actual video review of the fantasy trip box set where I go into great detail about it and give my opinions. Generally speaking, they are positive opinions. So be sure to check that out. Okay, and I am just about caught up, I think. All right, so I'm going to comment, before anything else, I'm going to comment a little bit about why there hasn't been an RPG Pundit Presents this week. We were going to this week release the OSR Medieval Authentic Companion, which was the first compilation volume of the RPG Pundit Presents stuff, full of medieval authentic stuff. A really lovely 266-page book. We ran into a couple of complications which caused us to cancel it. I think apparently a few people managed to purchase the PDF version before we stopped before we shut it down. It's going to come out very soon though. The book is being worked on. It's going to come out again. And part of what created this complication is that I'm part of a deal going on right now where RPG Pundit Presents will no longer be published by Presses Intermedia, but will instead be published by a new company. Well, not a new company, but a new company to publish this, right? That is called Spectre Press. And it's a good deal. It's not a bad deal for me. It's not a bad deal for Presses or for Spectre. I think it's something that had to be done. And it's just causing some delays, right? But I think very, very soon the Medieval Authentic Companion is going to come out. It'll be available on drive-through in both PDF and print. I don't know if it'll be available in other places. It might be. We might put it out on Amazon, or we might put it out on, I don't know if the press, I'm guessing maybe it won't be available on Presses Intermedia, but maybe it will. I don't know. We'll check that out, I guess. We'll see what happens there. But one way or the other, it's going to be a release that's coming very soon. And then we're going to continue doing the RPG Pundit Presents issues at least for a certain period of time before switching to dedicate ourselves more to putting together the compilations and for me to start working on some new projects. And one of these projects might be one of those source books I was just talking about, either the Anarchy or the Crusades, but it also might be something else, which I don't want to really go into right now. But when I do, it'll be a surprise. That basically it would not be a Lion and Dragon source book, though sooner or later I am going to make one. But I might take a little break to instead do something I've been meaning to create, a game I've been meaning to do for a long time. Okay, so that's basically the story of why, first of all, why there hasn't been a new Pundit Presents and why the Medieval Authentic Companion hasn't come out yet, even though I said on Sunday in Inappropriate Characters that it was going to come out. Monkeywork says, in my opinion, Fantasy Trip is better than GURPS. I generally feel the same way, Monkeywork. I think Fantasy Trip is, to me, a much more enjoyable game to run than GURPS. But opinions vary. We're allowed to have differing ideas about this particular subject. Fantasy Fan, I just said I'm not going to say what the new game is that I'm developing. I'm glad all of you like the... Yes, I'm working for Ernst Stavros Blofeld. Very good. All right, so one of the topics I was going to get into today, because some people had asked, is how did I start doing the pundit thing, right? Like, where does this come from? And really... my thought was that everybody sort of knew that, but then I realized that I've had an audience that has grown a lot over the years, and that there's probably, it used to be that almost everybody who was a fan of mine at least knew about, maybe they didn't read it every day, but they knew about my blog, because that's what I was first. Before anything else, I was a blogger, right? And except that now that blog is, it's still up, but I don't post in it every day anymore. And now my emphasis has switched over to social media, specifically to YouTube, but also Twitter and Mewe. And I guess that maybe some of you watching are not really familiar with the backstory of who the hell is the RPG Pundit. So here we go. I've actually been doing this for longer than almost anyone. Okay, I've been the RPG Pundit since 2005, right? That's when the Pundit was born. So like 15 years now, pretty much. I was originally inspired to set up the RPG Pundit blog because of some issues that I had seen with the gaming scene in that time. If you were around back then, you might have known about this, but if you weren't, this might seem really weird because it's completely ancient history. But back in 2005, you had a mainstream of role-playing that was run by D&D 3rd edition, basically. And then you had, especially online, this movement that was called the Forge, who were people that were dedicated to creating what they called story games, which was to try to radically change the whole nature of RPGs into these games where what your purpose in the game is to design a story. And they were all very, very pretentious, very artsy, and somewhat left-wing in orientation. Like, you could really tell, even without it being overtly so, you could tell that these guys were mostly leftists, right? They weren't SJWs yet because there wasn't such a thing as SJW. But that's what they were. And they had kind of done all the things that we've now seen SJWs do. They had engaged in entryism, in particular, where they'd kind of taken over, along with kind of the more pseudo-mainstream, semi-mainstream, pretentious crowd, like the White Wolf people, the ones that were into the vampire stuff, that were like their allies in this. They'd taken over the big discussion forums back then, because this was, before the age of Twitter or really Facebook or any of that. The place where people talked about RPGs in 2004, 2005 were discussion forums. And they took over one of the big ones that was called RPGNet and started banning everyone from RPGNet that didn't agree with their ideas. They politicized RPGNet by creating a forum, or pushing the Off Topics forum into being a politics forum, and then banning anyone who didn't have the politics that they liked. So the Forge's influence was something I saw as very dangerous, because they pretended back then that their games were academically designed, right? They talked about Forge theory and game theory, not game theory like the mathematics thing. It's nothing to do with that. But they were acting as though like they would write these papers that looked like they were university papers, where they talked about, the mechanics of designing things. They had these ridiculous charts about how people game, and these theories about how people game that had no basis in reality. It was all complete and utter bullshit. But they sounded really smart. And people that want to be smart would look at something like that and think, oh, well, that's really smart. So I'm going to pretend that I understand that and that I like that because I want to be smart, right? And so then they would allow this influence of Forgism to creep in and basically screw up games, right? Which it eventually did, even to D&D, right? Because 4th edition D&D is in a way based on Forge's theory. It's based on this idea that D&D isn't good for anything other than what they made 4th edition into. But anyways, at that time, I had also been concerned about the politicization of gaming in a game that was clearly very propagandistic in the D20 world, in the kind of D&D world. Back then, there wasn't an OSR. There was Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. And then there were D20 games, which are games that were open license games based on 3rd edition mechanics, but published by third parties with an open license. And there was a very kind of successful D20 game at that time. Well, sort of, yeah, it was, I guess it was successful. They did enough of a run that it must have had some success. That was called Blue Rose, and Blue Rose was a setting book set in basically a social justice utopia, where the characters were all heroic collectivists in a fantasy collectivist world, where this magical deer would choose the king, and anyone who didn't obey the collectivist utopian ideas of tolerance and communism and things like that would end up being exiled, branded and exiled, and so it was like hilarious because it was like a dystopia, but the people creating the game didn't seem to realize it, right? Oh, hello, Mariah Sinclair. Thanks for waving. Anyway, this game was like just unbelievably, as a setting, it was just unbelievably ridiculous, and I rightly started mocking it. So I saw that there were these kind of twin right there in 2005, the beginning of the creeping politicization by the left of the gaming hobby, and at the same time these pretentious dicks that were trying to alter the gaming hobby to be what they wanted it to be rather than what it was. So I decided, having tried talking about it with them on their forums that they then banned me from, I said, well, then what can I not get banned from? I started a blog, and there I developed into the identity of the RPG Pundit. And they all thought that they kind of that I was going to disappear into obscurity, and instead I became a really well-known blogger on the scene. So much so that they started getting really upset when I had people that were fans of my work going to their forums and commenting, and so they called it my proxies, right? And so then the term for people who followed me back then, which I sometimes still use just kind of instinctually, was the Proxy Army. And it was a lot of fun. It was a fun era, right? Along the way, there had been like a website that had been set up as an alternative to the RPGNet site that was called therpgsite.com. And the people that set up this site had like kind of made a half-hearted effort to promote it, and then it failed, and they were going to close it down. And I found out about this, and so I did a blog entry where I was really critical about how they could have, how could they have failed at doing this when there's an obvious demand for a free speech RPG forum. And what the owner of the site said, "Oh yeah, you think you're so great, you think you can succeed where I failed?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I can." Right? And they said, "All right, well, here's the deal. I'm going to transfer over full ownership of the RPG site to you, absolutely free, and let's see if you can actually make it work." And so I said, "Okay, sure." And of course, everybody, all the swine, on the other side, predicted that I was going to fail. And instead, within 6 months, I ended up having one of the most successful RPG forums that is still very active to this day. www.therpgsite.com. You can go on it. If you're a Zoomer and you've never been familiar with an RPG forum, you should try it. They're really interesting. They're a good way to have interesting, more in-depth talks about RPGs and discussion on RPGs. And the RPG site is a site where you can speak your mind without any like concern. You have to stay on topic, and I mean, you can't like stalk people or something, but other than those sorts of things, or post illegal content, but you're allowed to, you're not going to get banned for commenting the wrong comment about D&D. Let's put it that way. So yeah, that was the RPG site. It became a huge success, and consistently every time these guys have like predicted my doom, I ended up becoming more successful than I was before. Right? I started designing games, and they predicted those games wouldn't do well, and the games did well. Each one has done better than the previous one, for example, which is a really, that's pretty much the hallmark of success. And the last few ones have done really, really well, like Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion have been really big successes. And the RPG Pundit Presents series is doing quite well too. So I ended up doing all this sort of thing, became a kind of big name on G+, which was the social media site at the time. It doesn't exist anymore. I'm sold. And then I ended up being asked by there was one guy, you see, who was a very early reader of my blog and who read my blog all the time, commented a lot. We chatted on email about gaming. He talked about coming to live in, for a while he had lost his job and he was thinking about coming to live in Uruguay and writing as a freelancer, and asked me about that. And this guy, his name was Mike Merles, right? And so me and Mike were friends. And when he took over the D&D section of Wizards, it was still 4th edition. I was super critical about 4th edition. So I wasn't really a good ally to him at that time, but 4th edition was garbage. He couldn't say it was garbage, of course. He wasn't allowed to because he was working, right? It was his job to try to make it work. But as soon as as soon as 4th edition was announced to be over and 5th edition was coming out, lo and behold, I became a consultant on 5th edition D&D. And so that's how I ended up being one of the contributors to Dungeons & Dragons. And I worked directly with Mike that whole time that I was working as a consultant. It was maybe about not quite a year of work where there was regular, like near daily, not necessarily daily, but near daily, certainly in certain bursts. And then maybe for a while it would be a little quieter, of interaction between us on email. I have hundreds of emails between us during that time. Where we came up with like the big concepts. I wasn't like designing like specific spell effects or stuff like that, right? Like that's what low ranking drones like Jeremy Crawford do, right? That's not what, that's not the big picture, right? I was doing the big picture stuff with Mike, right? And it was really interesting. It was a great job. Fulfillment of a childhood dream, right? A lot of you who are gamers as kids, right? And I started gaming when I was about 11, right? Might have someday had the dream of, imagine if someday I get to make a role-playing game or I get to write for D&D, right? I can remember literally thinking that when I was 12, and here I ended up getting to do it. So that was a lot, it was wonderful. And the rest is basically history. I started doing YouTube when G Plus announced that it was shutting down. and I've been doing the YouTube channel for quite a while now. We're already above 1,500 subscribers, which is fantastic. So I hope that if you haven't subscribed yet and you're watching this right now, please subscribe. If you haven't before, hit the notification bell so you never miss things like live streams and videos. And please be sure to share this video and all of my videos everywhere you can. I'm not stopping now. That's just a little commercial break. But I think I've told you the basic story of my origins here. Let me take a look back here and see if there are any comments that I should answer to. White Wolf Games. Yeah, White Wolf and fans were insufferable back in 2005, says Darren P. Yes, they were. Same Riza points out Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition has now been taken over by SJWs. Yes, it has. Some things never change. Mr. Max Boyven says, so your proxy army were like the Groypers. Well, yes, except for not being anti-Semitic cunts, right? But other than that, yes. Darren asks, RPG Pundit, were you still here in Canada back then? No, I was already, I haven't been living in Canada for quite a long time, so I was not living there at that time. Same Riza says, last time I played Vampire the Masquerade, I played an Isis Bruja who only drank from gay people. My feminist DM didn't want me to play it, so I accused her of Islamophobia and she let me play it. I'm not sure I believe that story, Riza, but it is funny. Darren P says, I couldn't imagine Mike trying to make that 4th edition turd shine. Yeah, well, I did not envy Mike Merles when he was in charge of 4th edition. Like, it was a turd and it was doomed. And one of the reasons that I was hired, right away for 5th edition was that when 4th edition first came out, I famously predicted it would lose 2/3, that D&D would lose 2/3 of its customer base. And that's essentially what happened. I'll get into the politics stuff later, guys. So I'm not going to comment any further on what I just mentioned a little while ago until later in the live stream, because I don't want to scare away the people that aren't interested in talking about those things. I do believe we should talk about those things, of course, but let's stick to RPGs a bit longer. All right. Vorpalinville says the last good D&D product was Pathfinder. No, I totally disagree. Pathfinder was not a good D&D product. Ballerina Dancer says, what were you doing during the early days of the OSR? What role do you think you have had in that community? Oh, that's a very interesting question, Ballerina Dancer. So here's the story. In the early days of the OSR, I was writing on my blog. I was a major blogger. I was connected with other major bloggers that ended up being a big part of the OSR. People like Jeffrey Entz, the Greyhawk Grognard, all of these people, right? Now the thing that happened is in the early days of the OSR, like to me, when I first became aware of old school role playing, it was because of 2 products that were, to me, the origin of the OSR. But for some reason, that got revised out of the history of the OSR in a way that I think is unfortunate. Because to me, the 2 products that were really the first OSR books were a game called Encounter Critical. I'm trying to remember who it was that made it. It was another one of the consultants of D&D. Anyways, if someone remembers who did Encounter Critical, please make a note of it. But Encounter Critical was a game that was originally presented as a reprint of a long lost RPG from 1975 or something like that. Oh, was it S. John Ross? Yeah, thank you, Pete. Good guy, by the way, really good guy. Yeah, S. John Ross. Thank you. So anyways, Encounter Critical was presented as though it was a long lost RPG from 1975 or something, or from 1979, I think it was said. And it was like full of typos. It was like, it looked like something that someone had printed on an old fashioned like mimeograph thing, from the late 70s. It had ridiculous mechanics. You could play like Jedis in it, and there were Wookiees, and there were orcs, and there were wizards and elves and hobbits and all this stuff, and the rules made no sense. And it looked totally like some kind of fantasy heartbreaker from the era of the early days of old school gaming. And it was so authentic that some people bought it, right? Like they fell for it. And I didn't. Right away, I was saying, this is a fake, right? But it's awesome anyways, right? And eventually, Ross admitted that it was a fake, right? And yet, it inspired people to see how awesomely cool the old school era was in ways that specifically the 3rd edition and D20 were not being, right? And then the other early game in the OSR that to me was the other part of the beginning of the OSR was Mazes and Minotaurs, which was another pseudo old school project, except that this time it didn't pretend to be like a long lost game that was found or something like that. Instead, Mazes and Minotaurs was explicitly presented as an alternate history D&D, where it was like, what if the main influence for Gary Gygax, instead of being like the late 70s fantasy, had been Greek mythology. And so it's Mazes and Minotaurs is D&D done Greek mythology style. And those were, for me, hugely inspiring games. But instead what happened is that you had a bunch of people in the early OSR that were hooked on the Osric project and certain other, and some of the early OSR blogs started becoming increasingly fanatical about finding the one true proto D&D, right? Like the Ur D&D that was the answer to everything, right? And so they went, after like picking apart 1st edition, they started looking back to the old brown box, right? And then they said, no, we have to look before that, right? We have to start looking through like Gary Gygax's old laundry list and see if that gives us some clue as to the secrets of the true, original, and pure D&D, stuff like just absolute bullshit. As they started producing a series of clones, which were like precise copies that presented nothing new. They were just rewrites, basically, of old editions of D&D, which originally kind of served a purpose because back then you couldn't just print on demand them, right? Like they weren't around. So people wanted to have those rule sets in an available format. And okay, fine. But there were some people in the very early OSR that essentially said, we don't want innovation. OSR is about recreating old rule sets, making adventures that fit only those rule sets, doing nothing new and innovative. Anything new and innovative we're against, right? So that's why they erased Mazes and Minotaurs and Encounter Critical from the history of the OSR, and instead pretended that stuff like the Osric project was the beginning of the OSR. And anyways, from my point of view, I loved those things that they erased. I didn't really care. Like, yeah, I mean, okay, great, it's fine. I love AD&D. I love the basic expert set. I don't care about finding some proto-Ur D&D. I care about the idea of OSR as a design school, of saying, can we make games today that fit within painting completely within the lines and limited by these landmarks of old school design? Can we make those, but make them new? And the more new, the more innovative that they are while staying completely within those lines, the better, right? Lion and Dragon is a radically innovative game that is completely traditional OSR, right? And that was what I wanted to make. I wanted to make stuff like that, not this kind of nonsense of just, venerating only what actually came out in the old school era and trying to find some kind of purity test of everything after, late 1973 is actually not a role-playing game or something like that, something ridiculous along those lines. So my early role in the OSR ended up being one of terrible disappointment, right? Because I'd made a game that was basically another one of these early old school type games. It was an attempt to bring an old school feel to a new game, which was called Forward to Adventure. It was my first RPG. I wouldn't say it was really good. It had, if I reviewed it from the point of view of today, as a system, it had some serious flaws. The setting was interesting. It was very much a product of its time. It was another one of these, just like really Encounter Critical and Mazes and Minotaurs are not super great games today, but they were part of that early effort to make innovative stuff with old school mechanics, right? Not just old school feel, because there's always been that, like Castles and Crusades is that, but Castles and Crusades isn't an old school game, right? So anyway, Forward to Adventure was completely ignored by these people, right? In fact, they were very hostile to it because they said, no, this can't be, the OSR can't do anything new, right? So for a long time, I was basically the enemy of the OSR. I called them the OSR Taliban, and that they were a big problem. It was only when that started to change when two things happened. First, they ran out of games to copy. So that was an important point. And second, they ended up having people coming in that were really desperate to make more interesting new stuff. Okay, so that was really when I started to like the OSR. Like really the first things that came out that I think fit that were the Wilderlands of High Fantasy and I think that's what it was called. Anyways, the Wilderlands OSR book. And of course, the Lamentations of the Flame Princess, LOTFP, by James Raggi. So you have to give them credit. They got the OSR out of the OSR Taliban. Right? And then when my next OSR game came out, Arrows of Indra, it was well received for the most part. And it was a totally innovative game because it used old school mechanics, but it produced it had some interesting new stuff thrown in there, and it was in a completely different setting context. It was old school D&D done using authentic Indian myth. So, Fantasy Fan 011 says, based on your experience, where do you see RPG mechanics going in the future? It's really hard to say. I can't predict it, to be honest. Right now, I think we're seeing more and more innovative OSR mechanics happening, but I'm not going to pretend that can last forever. Eventually, there will be some new design movement that will catch on in a popular way. I just can't imagine what it would be. Maybe it'll be people throwing off, because one of the things about 5th edition was that you had 5th edition, when Mike Merles and I designed it, one of the things we essentially wanted to create in the big picture of 5th edition was what we were calling modularity, was the idea that 5th edition was really easy to change the rules without crashing the whole system. Because we envisioned a popularity of 5th edition that would have every gamer wanting to make their own hacks of the game and their own versions and their own settings and their own stuff. And that was what we were hoping to do. It didn't turn out that way. Instead, what happened, and maybe now with the encouragement of the SJW crowd, is that instead the D&D culture for 5th edition is just the opposite. It's like, you can't change the rules. You have to follow what's in the books. We have to, conform to the rules as written. We have to ask people like Jeremy Crawford or Perkins how to resolve rules questions. The DM can't decide those things, right? Like, it's just this horribly oppressive atmosphere. So I think maybe what'll happen is we'll get a movement of people wanting to do crazy hacks based on the 5th edition rules, and that will become popular. Maybe, but that's just a guess. Same Rise that says, thoughts on evil campaigns? Well, evil campaigns can be okay. I think a lot of times they can get pretty cliched. How's Your Father said, is it possible to still play the original D&D from the 70s? Yeah, it is. I mean, in fact, a few years ago, Wizards, when at the same time that they came out with 5th edition that same year, they came out with a recreation of the original box set that was just beautiful. Not my favorite edition, but you can still definitely play it. Aaron the Pedantic says, what's your favorite product that you've worked on And what's next for you? I think it's hard. It's a hard call, but it is definitely and unquestionably for me uh, between Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion. I think Dark Albion is the setting of an epic campaign that I ran that was the campaign I wanted to run, you know. So like it was a defining campaign for me. And Lion and Dragon is the game mechanics that came out of that campaign. So in a way, maybe there's a tie there. Monkeywork says, you've said before, I believe you personally aren't a fan of playing online, but do you have any thoughts or opinions on D20, Fantasy Grounds, or other tools? No, I don't, because I don't use them, so I really couldn't comment very much on that. Judd Goswick says, the myth of Encounter Critical was so amazing, and there was some great stuff in there about leveling up that was gold. Yeah, it was. It was really cool. And Mason Minotaurs was so good. Yes, you're right. It's unfortunate that the OSR, you know, the OSR Taliban decided to like just erase it from history. Fantasy Fan points out Encounter Critical is available for free on Drive-Thru RPG. I'd recommend you check it out. It's really it's a trip just to read, you know. I see we've got quite a lot of comments. I should never have taken the bait on Boyvin, although I was going to talk about the Turning Point USA thing later, but I can see on the comments we've got some people making unrequested opinions about Israel. But well, we'll get to that. Max Boyvin, I'm gonna take the bait one more time here. Boyvin says at least Pundit doesn't pretend to be a Christian or a conservative. That's actually true. I'm not a Christian. I don't dislike Christians. I have a lot of respect for the Christian religion. It's part of the foundations of the West, without a doubt. It's made very important contributions to the West. I don't think it's the end point of the development of Western civilization. I think that the world after the absolutism of Christian theocracy came to an end ended up being a better West than when the entire West was dominated by the church. But I have tremendous admiration for Christianity, and I'm also a scholar of religious history, meaning that I'm quite familiar with the history of Christianity, and I've probably read a lot more Christian texts than most people, including probably most Christians. I guess it's fair to say I wouldn't define myself directly as a conservative. I would define myself as right wing. There is a difference, of course, right? The right encompasses more than just conservatism in the strictest sense, because the right also encompasses libertarianism. The difference is whether the thing that is most important to you is kind of social conformity. And I think when Boyvin says conservative, he means a right-wing collectivist. And no, I'm not a right-wing collectivist, right? I'm a right-wing individualist. So that's a different thing. Anyways, I don't want to just dive into the politics section quite yet, though we will get there fairly soon. Ballerina Dancer says, Stars Without Number seems to me to be the most streamlined OSR rule set. Well, I don't know about that. It is a streamlined rule set, but for example, you're going to see in RPG Pundit Presents number 100, a science fiction rule set that is more streamlined than Stars Without Number, though maybe I don't, cover quite as many topics, so I don't want to be unfair there. I think that there is a basic skeleton of what the OSR rule set is, which is pretty straightforward, right? And a lot of games go that way, right? Like there's nothing particularly rules heavy about LOTFP either, or Lion and Dragon. It's one of the defining things about the OSR actually is that you don't have super complex main core rules, because the main core rules are just D&D. Same Rises says, the 5th edition business rules seems to have been written by a communist. Those were the first rules I changed. They didn't read Austrian economics. I admire that comment. Monkey Work, see you later. Sorry I didn't see you when you were saying goodbye. You're probably gone already. Okay. I guess that we can go into that now because we're it's dominating the chat now, the live chat. So sure, let's start to talk about this, right? For those of you who are not familiar with what we're talking about, oh, hang on, Ballerina Dancer just came back with an interesting question. Did the whole Sword Dream bullshit die off yet? It was essentially stillborn. Nothing of value has been produced by them. There's still some of them like trying to push it from time to time, like trying to promote the claim of it, but it's gone. It's done, really. It's been taken care of. Let's put it that way. Okay, so for those of you who don't follow right-wing politics, there's a movement called Turning Point USA, which is one of various different movements to bring right-wing politics of different stripes into specifically into youth culture and into the like colleges and universities in the US, right? So because for a long time, what you saw in the US, obviously everybody knows that the left has been dominating all of education from pre-K up to doctoral studies, right? And that most universities are filled with people who have already been or are in the process of being indoctrinated into, left-wing ideology. And there were always, like the Republican Club, but usually that Republican Club were like the guys in bow ties who read the National Review and were like these super milquetoast neocons, right? That didn't convince anyone. And then we started getting some movements over the last few years. Turning Point USA is one of them. There are others as well that worked on either exposing the fanaticism of the SJWs in college campuses or in just providing a club for actual right-wing activism in a strong way on college campuses. And one of these is Turning Point USA. I think Charlie Kirk is the founder, I think. I know that he's like the person in charge of it now. And they go around, they do like talks, they do different public events that are all trying to like bring attention. They're pro-Trump, they're unabashedly these patriotic type of conservatives, right? They're basically, as far as I can see, firmly within the standard of the new right, the Trump right. They're not neocons. They're not like George Bush type conservatives. They are Trump conservatives. There's a lot of them that are Christian conservatives, but not all of them. Just like the Trump movement is like that, right? Like fundamentally, because I'm going to say this because I don't know. Some of you, let me know how many of you here maybe aren't conservatives, right? Aren't in the right wing and don't read a lot of right wing stuff. You may have the wrong impression of what the right wing in America is today, because you might still be thinking that the right wing is a bunch of warmongering pro big corporation neocon types and religious conservatives that want to ban abortion types and put the Bible in every classroom, right, or something like that. Which was the old, those were the two old factions of the Republican Party. They were the alliance that was the Republican Party all from like the 70s until the 2000s, when it pretty much was proven completely bankrupt in the George Bush era, right? Neither of them were very good for different reasons, right? Like the religious right, the moral majority movement, besides being a bunch of dicks, right? The only thing they really accomplished, they didn't bring morality into American politics. Instead, they ended up bringing immorality into the evangelical movement in the United States, right? Like that was the only thing they accomplished, is they corrupted. They didn't remove corruption from politics. They corrupted religion, right? And the neocons were basically, they showed themselves to be completely unprincipled in any way. They don't have any love of country. They don't have any patriotism. They have a plan to make very rich people who are essentially very rich globalists who have no allegiance to any country richer, right? So those guys are not the modern Republican Party, right? The modern Republican Party, as I define it, let's call it Trumpism, right? The Trump Republican Party are people who have to have some basic fundamental points, I think, to count as a new right Trump Republican. You have to believe, first of all, in the idea that America is a great country, right? And whether or not you're American, I mean, I'm not American, but I do believe America is a great country. You have to believe in kind of this civic nationalism, right? You have to believe in a nationalism that encompasses everyone, because that's the Trump nationalism. It's not an ethno-nationalism at all, right? Trump has repeatedly pointed this out. If you look at his speeches, he talks about how the USA is for everyone who is a patriot of the USA, right? Like, and so he is completely behind this Enlightenment principle of West. The thing that made the West great as a civilization is that we define citizenship by ideals and ideas and not by blood or soil, okay? And this is the patriotism that Trump pushes. You have to be a believer in constitutionality and personal liberty, so that you have to believe in the First Amendment, and you have to believe in the Second Amendment, especially. But you have to believe in most of the other amendments too, right? Maybe with less strength than those first two, but you really have to believe in those first two. And among, of course, the Trump right, believing in the First Amendment in great part also involves being willing to stand up, laugh at, and mock the anti-First Amendment SJWs. And finally, if you are a Trump conservative, I think, or a Trump Republican, a Trump part of the new Trump right, you believe in and support Israel. Trump does. Trump loves Israel, right? His whole family loves Israel. Half his family is Jewish, right? And this is something that today, as much as the left wants to present it, anti-Semitism on the right is a tiny, tiny and very marginalized faction of people that have almost no influence over mainstream conservatism, over the political, the political machine of republicanism has no, there is no anti-Semitic influence on the Republican Party. There's a huge anti-Semitic influence on the Democratic Party, and an even huger one in the UK on the left-wing Labour Party, right? Whereas with the Conservatives, you don't see an anti-Semitic movement being influential. And so the real anti-Semitism in the modern era is found on the left, right? But there is still a rump of the right wing, which is either the kind of the pure neo-Nazi crowd, or sometimes you see these ultra-conservative pre-Vatican II Catholics that have a fundamental beef on this kind of religious anti-Semitism regarding Catholicism. And so those people do exist, but they are a beleaguered minority who are ignored and mocked by everybody else on the right. And then you also see, and this is different, and it's important to note that this is different, that there's this group of like shitlord Zoomers that have taken up posting anti-Semitic content in the form of memes or in the forms of, saying stuff that's going to trigger people. I think mostly for the sake of triggering people, right? Like there are the true believers, and then they're the ones that are just doing it for kind of sick laughs, right? And I'm not saying that that's okay to do, but I'm also saying that you can't pretend that those people represent a genuine mass that is going to rise up in this kind of anti-Semitic, violence or something like that. Like, that's not what those guys are about. They're trolling you, right? That's what they're doing. But there are people that are genuine fascists or what have you that also incidentally do not believe in the Constitution of America. They don't believe in democracy. They've said as much. And, one of these guys is Nick Fuentes, right? Who is like a hero to some of these people, in spite of his Latino sounding name, to this kind of ethno-nationalist right that have strong anti-Semitic tendencies. He is a virulent anti-Semite. He is somebody who has encouraged these anti-Semitic memes that you see, and he's someone who desperately wants to try to push this agenda and create this perception that, of course, the left is all too happy to embrace, that somehow there's a mass movement that supports them, when there really isn't, right? The vast bulk of people that like Trump and that vote for Trump are people who also like Israel and want to support Israel, right? And that have no problem with Judaism and don't have really they don't give a crap what religion you belong to. If you're a patriotic American and you believe in the Constitution, you believe in democracy, you believe in Western values, and you believe in the the First and Second Amendment, right? But just recently, there was a big Turning Point USA event where you had a bunch of these people that follow this guy Fuentes, and at the question and answer part, asked a bunch of questions that were clearly meant to both promote their ideology and attack the TPUSA movement. And unfortunately, I think you have to be absolutely honest. It's very clear that Kirk was completely unprepared for these questions. Him and the guy that was on stage with him, they were completely unprepared for these questions. They answered them very badly. And then other people who should know better, like Sebastian Gorka on his show, where he also got trolled by these people, reacted even worse, with like Gorka trying to call for this guy Fuentes to be banned and censored, right? And like at that point, suddenly you actually have abandoned one of the central principles of what I would define as the list of the core principles of what defines a Trumpist right wing, which is that we're not about banning people. We're about, debating people, mocking people, laughing at people, insulting people. Any of those things are fine. But you don't say, oh, this guy is saying stuff that I don't like, so I'm going to censor him. You proved him fucking wrong, dude. You don't censor him. That's completely wrong, But okay, so that was the situation that came up. And one of the questions, there were a couple of questions there, right? Were like questions that were about, about why should we be supporting Israel, for that were presented to Kirk, and questions also because the other co-host of this event was a guy I don't remember his name, but he's a black gay Republican, and of course these people had issue with that, and they said, well, how does anal sex help to maintain conservatism? Which is it's a ridiculous question. And a question that they unfortunately completely flubbed the answer by just saying, oh, well, we shouldn't even listen to you because, you're whatever, right? Like their answer was very unprepared. And I think that it was very unfortunate that was the best that they could do about that, as a way to answer it. So okay. So my point, and the thing I posted in Twitter earlier today, in preparation for this live stream, in fact, is see, Western civilization is a set of ideas and ideals. Okay, it's not about soil. It's not about blood. That's all garbage, right? And the proof of that is that you have a bunch of straight white males who are champions of SJW thought and who have done much more to destroy, to damage the West in their efforts to destroy the West than any number of Latino people like myself, right? Or black people or gay people. And so, what I said in my tweet was that, skin color is completely irrelevant, and that sexuality is fundamentally a personal matter, as long as you're not trying to legalize, present enforced speech using force of law or something like that, right? Or enforce sexuality as a point of law or something like that, right? I mean, if someone comes along and says, if you don't sleep with a person with the genitals you don't like, then you're going to be accused of a hate crime. Well, that's okay, but that's not about sexuality. That's about imposing oppressive laws, right? So neither of those things have anything to do with being on the right. Race or sexuality have nothing to do with whether or not you're a right-wing person, right? And so what I would have said to these assholes is I would trade every single straight white male America-hating leftist for gay black guys who love America and defend the First and Second Amendment if I could, right? America would be better for it. That's the truth, right? Like if America lost every single straight white male that believes in illegalizing hate speech, and those were replaced with gay black males who were fanatically devoted to the First and Second Amendment and believed in American patriotism, America would become a much better place for it. And you have no rebuttal to that. So anyway, that's my argument. That's the response to that, right? I don't think saying, oh, well, you guys are just dumb and out of touch, that's not an answer, because you have, the problem is that, of course, when you jump with a question like that by surprise at someone, it can be hard to think up a coherent answer. But other people probably could have thought one up, right? Like I think Dinesh D'Souza would have thought one up, right? So Charlie Kirk was clearly unprepared in a way that sadly made him seem kind of amateurish. I'll grant you that. So let's look at some of the comments here. I haven't looked at the comments, so we'll see how we're doing so far. Dick Chappie says, TPUSA leadership are SJWs, though. No, they're not really SJWs. SJWs want to implement censorship. They want to implement enforced speech. These guys don't want to do that. What you're calling SJWs is just as stupid as when SJWs call me a Nazi, right? when I spend half my time arguing with anti-Semites and ethno-nationalists, right? George Riddlebach, Lorraine McLaren Hoopy says, I no longer believe in the left-right dichotomy, to be honest, fam. You know what? I think the left-right dichotomy is a very basic and often impractical dichotomy, because I think a much more fundamental dichotomy of what we have to fight for and what we have to look out for, from my point of view, is the collectivist versus individualist dichotomy, right? These people on the what you could call the extreme right, or these people that are in the extreme left, have in common that they are collectivists, that they believe that they should have a right to tell me what I should or should not be allowed to say or think or do, and that they should get to tell you what you should be allowed to say or think or do. I don't believe that I have the right to tell you what to say or think or do or buy or what you should be obliged to speak or any of those things, right? But the ultra Christian conservative right or the ethno-nationalist right, they believe those things, and so do most of the left today, unfortunately. So it is a collectivism problem. And the very few people on the left that are not collectivists, the white rhinos is what I've gone to calling them today, are people I'm basically okay with. They're almost in a, they're a nearly extinct species at this point, but the ones that are there, it's not a problem, right? Because I might disagree tremendously with them, right? Like I've got a guy in my DCC group who, like I mentioned, is a literal hardcore Trotskyite, an activist in the Trotskyite party here, and all sorts of stuff like that, right? But he believes in, open and free speech until at least theoretically until the time they pull out the guns and start the revolution, I'm guessing. But he wants to debate openly, right? And so there's not a problem there, right? We have diametrically opposed ideas on a lot of things, not everything, because of course a Trotskyite also has some of the same hate for the establishment that I have, but because he stands for free speech, at least for now, we can communicate, right? And fine, right? He wants to convince me of his ideas. He doesn't want to force me to obey his ideas. Again, until the revolution comes in, I'm sure I'm going to be one of the guys put on the wall. A guy whose name I can't even pronounce here says, notice how TPUSA went full, your ism, your ist, etc., and should be deplatformed. Does that sound conservative? No, that doesn't sound conservative. I agree. The reaction on their part was bad. It was not... They have done a crappy job of responding to the question. The problem is that there is just such an obvious response to the question, and that they failed to give it. It really disappoints me. But again, that doesn't make them SJWs. It just makes them bad at their job, Michael Herrera says that's an important distinction. Everyone who's a patriot of America. On the other hand, if you hate America, get the fuck out. Otherwise, I agree. Maya Sinclair says, shitposting is indeed part of our nation's founding. Well, you're correct about that. I mean, literally. That was literally something that the pamphleteers were doing at the founding of America, was shitposting. Dick Chappie says, ideals are garbage when you import millions who vote against your ideals. Well, you know what? You're right. Whether those millions are white people, black people, purple people, or whatever, if you have people coming in who do not believe in the ideals, by definition, those people are a problem, right? If you bring people in who do believe in those ideals, it doesn't matter if they're, Chinese people from Hong Kong, or if they're, Nigerians from Africa, or if they're Latinos, or Indians. It doesn't matter what their skin color is. If they believe in those ideals and stand for those ideals, if they fundamentally support the concepts that are what defines being a part of Western civilization, then they are part of Western civilization. And if you were born in a Western country and do not believe in those ideals, then you are not part of Western civilization, right? There are lily white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people born in any town USA, or in the heart of Germany, or in Somerset, England, who are not part of Western civilization because they do not embrace the ideals of Western civilization, okay? Mr. Max Moyman comments, I'm probably going to get demonetized because of this. You're saying, hopefully somebody will notice that I'm actually arguing against it, right? But you're saying that a Jewish elite is causing trouble and this will be bad for every Jew. No, that in itself is also a conspiracy theory. That is bullshit. Okay, the vast majority of Jewish people have, they have fundamentally views that tend towards the conservative, right? Certainly in Israel. Somebody pointed out that American Jews tend to be more left-wing. Okay, yeah, but that's because most American Jews live in LA or New York, right? And most white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who live in LA or New York are Democrats, right? So if you say 85% of Jews are Democrats, well, 85% of people who live in New York or LA are Democrats. So what's your point, right? And speaking as someone who has gone around with a lot of people of all different races, but including Jewish people that could be defined as part of the elite, I've hardly ever met one that is, an SJW. Like that's just not part of the fabric, right? This is conspiracy theory nonsense, right? It's not a Jewish elite that's causing trouble. It's just an elite of people, most of whom are not Jewish, that have become an establishment that conspires against our own civilization. Judaism or not has no bearing on it, right? George Soros isn't bad because he's Jewish. He's bad because he is conspiring against Western civilization, right? Netanyahu is not good or bad for being Jewish. He's good because he stands for Western ideals. Ballerina Dancer says, I've noticed many alt-right leaning Zoomers are now becoming poser Catholic socialists. Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, that's for a lot of these people. I'm not saying necessarily for some of the people I'm arguing with right now, but you have to admit it. It's something that's become fashionable for a certain class of shitlord. And they believe in that about as much as they used to believe in Pepe, right? Or in, the Legend of Keck, right? Which ironically, I find much more credible, than the kind of tradcon Catholic socialism that they're pushing. And in a couple of years, they'll find the next thing to try to use to outrage people with. Max Boyman says, I think Israel has a right to exist. Great. Jewish people deserve to have a homeland. Okay, good. I agree with you. And the USA should give them foreign aid. All right. Well, it sounds like we agree on everything there, Boyman. Good job. I definitely agree on all those points, right? Same Riza says, what's your opinion of, oh no, that's a question for Dick Chappie, of Muslims oppressing Christians in the Middle East and Africa. Well, Christian people get oppressed all over the world, in the Middle East and so on. Big problem, and what was especially disgusting for them. Well, we can bring it into like the Western context, right? Because really, we can't necessarily be the policeman of the entire world, but I think that one of the things we should do, because I mean, one of the problems with the ethno-nationalists is that they don't believe in anyone getting to come in, and in fact they want to get people out who don't fit certain kind of genetic ideals or whatever. But if you're a civic nationalist, if you're someone who believes in the ideals of the Western civilization, part of what you want is to specifically, you should bring in people that have your same ideals. And of course, that means you should be discriminatory to a certain extent of favoring groups that are obviously going to be more inclined to favor Western ideals, right? So, for example, people from Hong Kong, right? Like, they are obviously people that have embraced Western ideals. And so if you get refugees from Hong Kong, that's something you should try to bring more in of, right? Which doesn't mean you don't bring refugees in from other places. but specifically that's a good choice, right? Christians from Syria or Christians from Iraq. And one of the most horrible betrayals that you saw in both the US and Canada, like in Canada especially, Justin Trudeau's government, specifically, it made a point of let's import 20,000 or so Syrians into Canada, or I don't remember what the number was, but it was tens of thousands of Syrians into Canada, but they have to all be Muslim, right? They explicitly forbade Christians being among those Syrians, which is, that is the definition of someone who is trying intentionally to destroy West, which is not to say that every single Syrian Muslim that comes to Canada wouldn't be able to adopt Western values. Some of them very well might. But obviously, if you're choosing to say, well, we're specifically going to exclude Christians from coming to Canada as refugees and only want Syrians, Muslim Syrians as refugees, the only reason you would do that, where you would condemn those people, those Christian Syrians, to probable death under ISIS because they were being specifically targeted. There was no reason not to recognize them as refugees, except that you hate their Christianity, right? And that's horrifying. And guess what? Justin Trudeau is a straight white male of probably impeccable genetic breeding, right? So there you go, who is not Jewish, right? So once again, you have failed to demonstrate why we shouldn't have, gay black men being part of the Trump right movement. Max Boyven makes a list of organizations and individuals that he says are responsible for the rise of anti-Semitic sentiments. No, they're not. They are excuses for continuing to promote anti-Semitic sentiments. You know very well that before them, there was, the Protocols of Zion, which were a fraud, right? Before that, there was legends of baby eating, stories, the blood libel, right? And fundamentally, for the Catholic Church, it was this notion of the killers of Christ, right? So you're saying, oh, such and such, their bad behavior points out, why people are anti-Semitic. Well, by that logic, you should be looking at the good behavior of a huge number of Jewish people that have contributed to conservative thought, to conservative economics, to conservative social principles, to things like the sciences, the arts, and technology. And why do those few bad individuals outweigh the good, except that you want to pretend that they're bad individuals? That's exactly, by the way, the SJW mentality. They're saying, oh, well, this shooter was white, so that means all white people are evil, right? That's all you're doing there. You're doing exactly the same thing because you think exactly like the SJWs. You're looking at birth features, race, ethnicity, sexuality, and then saying, or gender, and then saying, that we're going to use a few examples to try to pretend that such and such group are irredeemably evil because they're our ideological enemy, right? It's typical collectivist, tribalist nonsense. I'm trying to keep up with the comments here, so I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff. I'm sorry. There's limits to what I can say. I hope that nobody's interpreting that as me being unwilling to address the points. I'm trying to find the best points, specifically the ones I think are the best criticisms, and address those. Dick Chappie says, again, you're mischaracterizing the reason for the questions, RPG Pundit. The problem is the open promotion of homosexuality and saying that's conservative, right? No one is actually saying that the open promotion of homosexuality is conservative. What they're saying is that homosexuality is irrelevant to whether or not you are a conservative, right? If you are homosexual, an LGBT person, if you're a homosexual, and you are, advocating for hate speech laws and enforced speech laws and, arresting pastors who don't do gay weddings and stuff like that, then you are obviously not a conservative. If you're, if you're someone who is gay and is an advocate for Trump and what have you, there's this one guy, I don't remember his actual name, but his Twitter handle is The Persistence, right? And this guy is a gay Trump supporting conservative. And while you assholes were going after Charlie Kirk, and while Charlie Kirk was being a complete incompetent at responding to you, this guy, what he was doing, The Persistence, is him and a bunch of people that he put together were going to Baltimore, to the inner city, and cleaning it up with the help of local black kids and stuff like that, putting that on YouTube, putting that on video, sharing it on social media, showing a bunch of Trump voting conservatives busing into the heart of inner city Baltimore and come there, and they brought donuts and they had water and they started cleaning every sky, has done more for American conservative values and for American patriotism than either of you assholes put together, right? A pox on both your houses. It is that guy is way more of a hero than Charlie Kirk, and certainly way more of a hero than an anti-Semitic scumbag like Fuentes or the people that came out to talk about questionable opinions on Israel. So you can't tell me that there's anything inherently more likable about what these people are saying. Oh, we should screw democracy, right? And what you essentially want is just another type of collectivist, oppressive, totalitarian regime. So why should I care about what you want, right? You guys are exactly the same level of asshole of the people I'm fighting on the left. Dick Chappie says they're openly promoting homosexuality. How are they openly promoting homosexuality? All they're saying is you can be gay and be on the right. You can be gay and you can be part of Turning Point USA. You can be gay and you can, campaign for Donald Trump, because there's nothing about Trump that is anti-gay, right? So like, honestly, if please show me where Turning Point USA is saying that people who criticize homosexuality should be arrested or, stuff like that. Because maybe they are, but I certainly haven't seen that. Michael Herrera says, RPG Pundit, is mainstream being LGBT plus good or bad for culture, or doesn't make a difference? Well, what's good for culture is creating an environment that promotes the idea of individual liberty, right? Where it says you have the right to do what you want to with your own life, with your own body, with your own choices of what you read, what you think, what you say, and that nobody else, no other group of people have a right, so long as you don't try to impose your will on other people, they don't have the right to impose their will on yours, right? So if you're not going around assaulting people or trying to censor people or trying to in some other way oppress other people, they don't have a right to oppress you, right? And other than that, there's no relevance. Like, it's like asking, is being black good or bad for culture? It's an irrelevant point, because culture is about what you think. It's not about the color of your skin or who you like to diddle, like, really. Max Boyman says, I don't care about Baltimore. I don't live there and I'm an individualist. Isn't that what matters? Well, first of all, you're lying. You're not an individualist. That's pretty obvious from everything you said before. And second, the point is, it doesn't matter that it's Baltimore. The point is that the actual values of the West, things like charity, fraternity, the idea of people in communities coming together rather than of government coming in to fix things, right? They had 28 years of this congressman, this local congressman who just died. I forget his name now, but I'm sure you guys will remind me. Who was, it was a Democrat, totally socialist, and did nothing for that neighborhood of Baltimore, right? And here you have a bunch of people who come in to help what are essentially their fellow citizens, right? Like, and patriotism is a value that is important, right? As long as it's not imposed patriotism, right? This guy showed initiative as an individual with a bunch of other people who voluntarily came together to do good, and that's of huge value. Dick Chappie says that they parade homosexuality as good and moral. No, they don't. They just have gay people that are part of their movement. That's it. No, show me a source where Charlie Kirk says homosexuality is good and you should be gay or something like that, right? All that they're saying, all that the Trump right is saying is it's fine. We don't care one way or the other, right? That is not promoting anything. That's just saying, who you want to be in love with is of no business of ours, and that is a fundamentally conservative view. It's a conservative view of you having the right to be whatever you want to be, as long as it doesn't hit my nose. Oh yeah, we've got a big Alpha 9 says that was some thunder. Yeah, well, down here, the storms are like you wouldn't believe. Sometimes it rains, upside down and sideways. And this is the time of the storm season coming in now, and we're getting a nighttime storm that looks like a doozy. Absolutely. It is really storming. Hopefully it won't cut out the internet. It doesn't usually these days. Actually, Uruguay has a better internet infrastructure than almost anywhere in the United States, and faster and cheaper than almost anywhere in the United States. So it should be okay. Vorpal Anvil says, you seem really hung up on the anti-Semitic thing, but don't address the issue of TPUSA taking over other college right-wing groups, watering them down, blah, blah, blah. With neocon drivel and collecting, okay. I'm not going to use that word. There's limits to it. I don't want to get banned. So, Vorpal, I have not seen, I've seen a lot of college groups other than TPUSA that are still active. So I'm not sure what you're talking about, because, in most colleges, they're still like the old college Republican club, for whatever that's worth. Most of them are useless. Most of those are
just neocons in bow ties reading the National Review and doing nothing, right? So in contrast to me, it seems like TPUSA was something that really contributed. But there's others too. There's what is it, Campus Reform and Fire, and there's another one that I'm absolutely missing right now. That is the other big one besides Turning Point. That is like a nationwide college right-wing movement. There's a lot of course, local pro-Trump college groups that are forming. So I don't really see where this taking over business is happening, right? I could be wrong. And maybe there are certain specific situations where that's happened. Do you mean taking over in terms of just like knocking the wind out of? Because it sounds like a lot of the people who did complain about that I remember were these like, the kind of William F. Buckley type, not even, because William F. Buckley was kind of okay, right? He was in his own time, he was actually pretty good. There were these Bill Kristol type never Trumpers of the local college Republicans that were complaining that the young people are going to TPUSA instead of them because TPUSA is actually doing stuff, whereas they're just sitting around discussing the free market and why we have to let corporations do whatever they want. Dick Chappie says, why do you call people who criticize the $38 billion of U.S. taxpayers' money being sent to a rich nation as anti-Semites? No, I don't criticize that. I criticize that they're using that as a cover for what is obviously a much deeper specific hatred of that nation, of that group of people, because you don't see them making the same criticism of other elements of aid. I would say there's certainly a libertarian argument for the U.S. not sending aid anywhere, period. The government shouldn't be sending foreign aid to other countries. But I tell you what, let's stop all the other foreign aid first, and then we'll see about Israel. And frankly, if there's one country that, because it is set up, it is surrounded by hostile enemy forces, and it is the only Western country in the Middle East, that it is sort of justifiable to protect them, it is Israel. It's that simple. Israel is a Western country, not just that, it's a really good Western country, right? There are very few Western countries that are as good as Israel. There's the United States, and nowadays maybe Poland and Hungary. And that's pretty much it, I think, because the UK and Canada are complete shitholes at this point. So, there you are. Mr. Max Boyden says, they say you should support Trump because he legalized homosexuality in Botswana. Well, I don't know about the specific case of Botswana, but I guess you're referring to the fact that Donald Trump has been pushing for a worldwide campaign to stop the criminalization of homosexuality worldwide, including places where homosexuality has the death penalty. And yeah, I think that's a really good reason to support Trump, right? Because no government anywhere should be allowed to imprison you or put you to death for your sexual orientation. That seems obvious to me. That is an obvious right-wing value. Yes, that is something obviously conservative, right? Because if you don't believe that, you go from being a conservative to being an ISIS-style theocrat, right? That's all you are. You're not a conservative. You are just a barbarian. Okay, that's not conservatism. You're just arguing for having a primitive, barbaric, anti-democratic culture that basically isn't the West either. So you're an enemy of the West, right, at that point. Mariah Sinclair says, considering I'm a Trump supporter and bisexual, I've never felt the need to let it define me. But SJWs who promote anti-politics would call me traitor. Well, there's a lot of people who have said it, lots of people who are LGBT Trump supporters that have said, people that are in their 20s, right, that said, when I came out, it wasn't really any kind of a big deal because everybody accepted me when I came out as gay. But when I came out as a Trump supporter, I lost all my friends, right, and everybody hated me, right? So I can totally sympathize with that. And it's part of what there's actually a very particular kind of courage that it takes, because there's nobody the SJWs hate more and go after with more intensity than the people that aren't obeying what they want minorities to be, right? Because if you're, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy and you don't agree with the SJW movement and you support Trump, you're useful to them, right? There's nobody as useful to the SJW left and the establishment left and the Democratic Party as people like, Spencer and Mr. Boyven and all the, the kind of the white anti-Semites out there and all those people. Those are useful idiots for the left. Absolutely they are, right? But if you have Milo Yiannopoulos, one of the reasons why they made such an enormous effort to destroy him was because he was gay, right? That was something that the left couldn't risk, because gay people have to obey them and follow all of their ideology or else, right? One of the reasons that they have such a huge issue with Kanye West is that he's black, or with Candace Owens is that she's black and a supporter of Trump. And this is a much bigger threat to them than, that Sebastian Gorka supports Trump, right? Like, that's not a threat. Candace Owens, a black woman supporting Trump, is a huge threat to them. Because, one doesn't, her race doesn't matter to her conservatism, but it matters to the SJWs because it destroys their race-based and gender-based and sexuality-based ideology. They are collectivists, so they have a tribalist race-based ideology. The anti-Semitic ethno-nationalist right are collectivists, so they have a race-based and gender-based and sexuality-based ideology, right? So for these people, that is a problem. It's a problem for, the ones on the right if you have a black person who's a conservative, and it's a problem for the ones on the left if you have a black person who's a conservative. They agree on almost everything. They're just flip sides of the same shitty coin, Anyway, Dick Chappie says, remember when TPUSA attacked the Covington boys at the drop of a hat? I've heard that. I don't recall them specifically. I recall a lot of groups that did that, including the Catholic Church. And all of those groups were wrong. They were wrong, and they were cowardly for having done it. They made a jump decision where they really should have known better, right? So if TPUSA was one of those groups, then they were wrong. Absolutely. I don't think that means that they don't, that the people in TPUSA, maybe there are some people in TPUSA who don't actually believe in Trump conservatism, but I think that in most cases it's just that people do make mistakes, right? People make the wrong call sometimes. The YAF, the Young American Foundation, maybe that's the one I was thinking of, yeah. Dick Chappie says, how about we cut off all foreign-aided ones? Yeah, sure. Let's cut off all foreign-aided. You're not going to get an argument from me about that, right? The point is that the people that are obsessed with the foreign aid to Israel are doing it not because they don't want foreign aid or because they don't like spending money or because of some kind of economic conservatism. They're doing it because they hate Jews. Let's just be honest, okay? Like, quit pretending that this isn't about that specific group of people, So come on. Otherwise, why wouldn't you be making a much bigger deal about the foreign aid to Saudi Arabia, Michael Herrera says, what about Brazil? Is it going Western? Is Bolsonaro really Brazil's Trump? Well, Latin America is part of the West. It's a part of the West that also has some parts that aren't very Western. It has a lot of parts that got infested with communism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where there's been a big legacy there. It was also a case where it was the CIA and the deep state of the US screwed everything up and made it worse because it made martyrs out of certain people that wouldn't otherwise have been martyrs. Regarding Bolsonaro, I think Bolsonaro is, from what I've seen of him thus far, I'm pretty impressed. I've seen the same hysteria. You see the exact same hysteria from the left here about Bolsonaro as you see about Trump in the US. I think he has some extreme views. There's some things he says. I think some of it is also trolling, like in the same way that Trump trolls the libs, Bolsonaro does too. But I think that there are some views he has that maybe I wouldn't go so far as to agree with. I don't agree with everything that he believes in. I think that Brazil was an absolute disaster under the socialist government that was there before the Workers' Party or whatever it was called. Lula's party. The corruption in Brazil is massive. Bolsonaro is up against an entire state mechanic, plus all these very powerful unions and the teachers and the intelligentsia that all despise him. He's got the same difficulties that Trump does. It's a very tricky situation. I've actually met people in Bolsonaro's family, and I found them very reasonable people. So I think that he is a hopeful figure in Latin American politics, actually, if you're on the right. And what you see right now is an interesting situation that a lot of the left-wing governments of before have kind of fallen apart. Uruguay is about to probably stop having a socialist government for the first time in 15 years. It's about to switch back. Uruguay, by the way, is a country that has a very functional democracy. A lot of these countries don't. You saw in Bolivia, for example, massive voter fraud, massive corruption in the latest election. Very serious problems there. There's an ongoing conflict going on there, and we'll see how it pans out, right? But I think one of the things that is new as of these last 2 years, it's basically a consequence of the complete collapse of the Chavista movement, right? Of Hugo Chavez and how Venezuela's fallen apart. That had a demoralizing effect on the communists and on this hardcore socialist intelligentsia that has run everything for a very long time in South America. And now suddenly you're seeing this resurgent right that for a long time the right here, it was either the old, pseudo-fascist supporters of the military juntas, or it was this very useless kind of right that was kind of just this party of the upper middle class that almost, that was completely ineffectual against the communist movements that had sprung up in the 90s and 2000s. Now you're seeing a new movement to the right that seems to be working at drawing people in that had for a long time ended up being voters of these socialist communist movements. So it's a hopeful situation. Vorpal Anvil says, there we go, it's Vorpal Anvil, now I figured out. It says, I love your work, hate your political opinions. I'd love to speak to you about these issues on a stream with you. Well, that could happen. I'm not familiar with your YouTube, but send me a message. Contact me on Twitter or Mewe or here or whatever. Let me know. I'd like to know a bit more about what about my political opinions you hate, but we'll see. It might be possible. I'm open to interviews or debates. Dick Chappie says, if it's good to cut off all foreign aid, which I agree wholeheartedly, then why didn't cut off everyone before Israel, not just cut off Israel and then start cutting others? Well, it's very simple. We have these two different ideas, right? My idea is that basically there shouldn't be any foreign aid for anyone But if there is foreign aid, then the priority of who should be given foreign aid are people who support and like America, and people who are supporting Western values, right? If you're telling me, well, we've got to give foreign aid to 2 countries, and the list of 4 countries on that, out of which we're going to pick 2, are Yemen, let's say Yemen and Saudi Arabia and Poland and Israel. There is no question to me which 2 out of those 4, if we're going to give foreign aid, we should give foreign aid to. Obviously, Poland and Israel. Because Poland and Israel are pro-American, and they love American values, and they love Western civilization. You, on the other hand, disagree. You want to cut off aid to Israel first because you hate Jews. Just admit it, dude. Like, there's, why are you trying to, I know why you're trying to pussyfoot around it, because you recognize the despicableness of that perspective, and that if you don't, that you're trying to, like, weasel your way around that, because you know that as soon as you admit that, you've lost all credibility because your views are disgusting. George Middlebach, Lorraine McLaren Hoopy says, when will Trump campaign get Saudi Arabia to stop persecuting homosexuals? Soon, I hope. And I certainly hope that they put that same pressure there that they've put on wherever, on Botswana or wherever else. I'm like way behind now. Aaron the Pedantic says, isn't conservatism about traditional Christian values? We still have sodomy laws in Texas that were put in place from thought like that. I think you don't actually still have sodomy laws. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think that all the sodomy laws have now ceased to exist in the US. But maybe I might be wrong. Well, that's you're gonna have to. I don't know if you got here late, but you're gonna have to look back at where I talked about at around the 1 hour mark the difference between the old right and the new right, and it was like half of the old right that had those kind of values, that is not what the new right is about at all. Vorpal Anvil, you say it took 15 seconds of internet searching to know that the Covington kids were in the right. Well, hang on. I was there, when the Covington scandal broke out. Well, probably all of us were there, but if you remember when it first came out, the immediate coverage was done in a hostile fashion with intentionally misleading footage, and it took the better part of a day before you really had. Before you actually would have been able to do 15 seconds of internet searching to know the Covington kids were in the right. But where people were wrong, including TPUSA apparently, including the Catholic Church apparently, and including a number of other people who should have known better, is that they fell for the claim of this. Like now, the amount of fraud the left does is so enormous that it's the same like if somebody claims that they had their hijab pulled off their head, how many fake hijab pulling stuff have incidents have we now seen? Like a half dozen at least, right? There was a kid in Toronto, the woman on the subway in the New York, there was one in Texas, there's all these different ones that turned out to be complete hoaxes, right? So it's a case of, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, won't get fooled again, what they should have done is waited to see where the evidence led, right? And it should have been pretty obvious that there was a very, very high chance that this wasn't a group of evil white school kids that were assaulting a peace-loving elderly Indian that was minding his own business, right? Like, that was just, because that was so clearly a narrative, right? And that's not, there was a slight chance, but, you shouldn't have jumped into that, right? Horace Vestige says, when did you start making RPGs? What game of yours are you most proud of? Well, I started in around 2008, I guess it was 2007, 2008, with Forward to Adventure. The game I'm most proud of, I've already kind of answered this a lot earlier in the live stream, but the game I'm most proud of, I think, is Dark Albion as the setting and Lion and Dragon as the system. Those are the ones I'm most happy about. Same Raisa says, Bolsonaro hasn't accomplished that much. He seems to be a lame duck president. That's not the view I've heard from most Brazilians. I mean, well, it depends on which Brazilians you ask, of course, because the leftist Brazilians think that he is, some kind of, horrible. Well, what left-wingers think about Trump, right? Same deal. But what I've heard from most conservative Brazilians is that, he is facing tremendous opposition, is having a lot of challenges from the institution way that the deep state is trying to, screw up Trump's efforts. You're seeing the same thing there with Bolsonaro. And it's not that he's not trying, it's that it's really, turning around a country that has been systematically infested with a cancer of leftism is really, really hard to fix, right? It's really hard to fix. And it's not surprising that people like Trump or Bolsonaro face roadblocks at every turn and challenges that they have to fight to overcome, and that they can't do it by themselves. Steve Park says, seems like the RPG industry is going full SCW is here to stay or just temporary. This question has been asked before too. You're going to have to go back at the end later to the earlier part, to the first hour of the live stream where I've answered that question. My answer is I think it will turn around, sort of. Let's see here. Trying to catch up on the comments. Sorry for the delay here. Trying to see somewhere that somebody pointed out Lawrence v. Texas got rid of sodomy laws that were not being enforced anyways. Yeah. Borplanville says, do you know how current media works? How does an overtly right-wing group fall for the New York Times headline? Well, people, I think that they fell for this even before that. I think that the fact that there was a video, they didn't, it's still very possible to fall for these things, right? And because sometimes these things do happen, rarely, but they do, right? So, the real issue was that they weren't, they didn't take enough time to investigate critically, right? Mariah Sinclair says, I'm going to head out. Great live stream. Well, thank you so much, Mariah. I think we're starting to wind down here. There's a lot less people watching now. I'm guessing because we're getting out of the nighttime hours into like the post midnight hours in the U.S. I had one more thing I was going to comment on, which is that I saw today, incredibly, it's been a long while since I've seen anything from Milo Yiannopoulos, but today I saw Milo has written an article about the Joker, which was quite an interesting article. He talked about the Joker as like a reversed version of the Christian allegory, and the reasons why the Joker's having the appeal he's having, representing this kind of movement of a reaction against the corruption of the postmodernist leftist world, in a world without God. And anyway, very, very interesting article. And you know what I think is actually, from what I've seen of it, that a better way to put that, because I don't think the Joker is a reasonable response. It is rather a it's the whole notion of what the Joker does is an understandable response when people think that they have no other option. You know, when what you're told is by, you know, in a world dominated by leftism, is you have to be this, you have to be, well, it's Nietzschean actually. You have to be the last man, right? Or the ultimate man, depending on which translation of Zarathustra you go by, right? But you have to be the last man. You have to be this thing that is just this disgusting, whimpering end of human being in this society that we've created, because we won't allow people to be the Superman, right? And the reaction to being the Joker is of someone that doesn't know that there is the option of being the Superman, right? So instead, what you're being given, if you're not being given permission to be a fully realized human, you regress to being a kind of animal, which is what the Joker is, a sort of animal response. So it's this, you know, humans, it's very Nietzschean actually. Humans are the bridge between the world of man and the world of God. So if you see someone that is basically saying you have to be one of these people that, you know, hangs himself from the bridge instead of going to become the overman, becoming the new man, right? You have to be the last man. So if your option is that or going back to being an animal, it's no surprise that some people are going to go back to being an animal. And this is where you see some of the kind of false masculinity that we see in our society today. What I mean is, of course, you have the SJWs trying to destroy the traditional masculinity. And so you see some people as a reaction taking on this kind of pantomime masculinity, right? Of like hyper-aggression, of, you know, do you even lift, bro? You know, like this stereotype of this fake hyper-inflated masculine that is not actually what masculinity is about. Masculinity is about standing up for principles. It's about having values. It's about defending the people you care about, right? It's about actual masculinity has to do with your virtue, not with, you know, being big and strong and aggressive, right? But these people have there's an entire generation of people that were raised being told you can either be this effeminate creature, this pseudo male, or you can be a bully. Those are the only two things that exist. They were never shown that third option, right? So the Joker is what happens in a world without Superman. You know, you're never shown another option. Anyway, so it was a fascinating article. It led me to some fascinating ideas there. Let me just check here to see if there's any last comments from people before we close down. This is, I think, easily the longest live stream I've ever done. I probably won't get a lot of views later, but whatever. once in a while, I enjoy the live stream for the fans. Michael Herrera says, RPG Pundit, how hard is it to publish your own RPG? It's really, really hard, which is why I've never published an RPG in my life. I've written all kinds of RPGs. I get other people to publish them for me, which is to me way easier. The problem is a lot of people can't do that because, you know, most publishers these days are very tiny operations, 1 or 2 or 3 man operations, and they mostly publish their own work. Most people are forced to be self-publishers. I was lucky enough that because of my story, and you'll see my story in the first hour of this video if you came in late, because I became very well known as a blogger, and because I became very well known as a as the owner of a website and all of this sort of thing, I was able to get other people to publish my work for me, which is what I'm much happier with. Jay Groom says, thanks for the stream. Enjoy your takes on the OSR and Liberty. Glad you enjoyed it. This is a very particular stream. Like, if you were only into RPGs, you should really only have watched the first hour of it, I guess. But here we are. Alpha 9 says, if what you say about the article about Joker is the case, then the Joker hypes up Bruce Wayne because he grows into the superhero Gotham deserves. Yeah, maybe. I guess. I don't know if you see enough of that to be sure, but yeah, I suppose so. That's a good point. Max Boyman says, does it bother you that a significant portion of your live audience are anti-Semitic cunts? Well, you know, I'm pretty sure a portion of my live audience are also SJWs. They're just too scared to say anything. So, you know, they're watching right now. You know that. I don't care what you think. I will debate what you say, right? You have a right to think whatever you think. I don't believe in gatekeeping or blacklisting or censoring you. I would rather confront you about it. Same Rises says, the Joker's an apolitical movie. It's about how people insert their beliefs in something. Communists think that the Joker is a movie about the ends of capitalism. Well, you know, it is sort of also a movie about the problems of capitalism. But I get your point. Yes, it's probably one of those things that makes it such an impressive piece of art, right? Is that we live in a world where there's very little art that is like that. Most art is obscenely, directly propagandist nowadays in sending a heavy-handed and direct message, right? Stuff that makes certain works so resounding for us, and nowadays, in part because they're so rare, they used to be much more common, is because they have these works that you can read into them all these different versions and levels and interpretations, right? So yeah, you have a point there, right? I interpret it from a Nietzschean perspective because I like Nietzsche. Milo interprets it as a Catholic, a reverse Catholic parable because he's a Catholic, right? And yeah, communists see it as being about, you know, late stage capitalism because they're communists, sure. Fantasy's Man says, I'll be reading through Encounter Critical later. Glad to have been introduced to a new system on stream. Well, I'm glad to have introduced you to it. But meanwhile, for those of you who have gone all the way through this, I really appreciate it. And if you want to be introduced to other things, be sure to check out my games, Lion and Dragon, Dark Albion, Cults of Chaos, Arrows of Indra, my books. Or if you want to support me with, you know, financially, you can also purchase some of my smaller products. I mean, I do have a Patreon page, and I do have a PayPal button, and for some people choose to just send money that way, which is great. I mean, that encourages me to do more stuff like this, like 2.5-hour live streams, for Christ's sake. But if you want to support me financially and get something back, then check out the RPG Pundit Present series. We've got like 97, what is it? I think it's 97 now, something around there. 96, 97 products now. We're about to come out with the Old School Companion, which is a compendium of the earlier issues. you're bound to find an issue that's going to have something interesting for you. There's adventures, random tables, there's setting stuff, there's new magic systems, there's stuff that's medieval authentic, there's stuff that's gonzo and weird fantasy. So check out something you like, purchase it, you're sending me some cash, and you're getting something in return. And that's great. And if you don't have a single penny, or even if you do, there's another great way you can support me, which is to subscribe, like this video, and especially share this video. Share it, or my other videos, if you don't want to share a 2.5-hour live stream that goes very deep into confronting some of the issues in the right. Yeah, share my videos in general with people, because that's a huge way to help me out and to get more subscribers, which I'm always grateful for. I've got a couple of more questions here. People ask, what do you think is the future of D&D after 5e? Will they bring out a point release to 5e rather than a new system? Let's just clean house and have a new team. I think those are all very difficult questions to answer right now. I think it depends on how long Mike Mearls can cling to his job. Will he outlast the rise of SJWs in pop culture, or will he be yet another one of the people that tried to placate them and gets his head on the chopping block? What will happen after depends on that. Lord Crunk says, what do you think of the Jeffrey Epstein death dump research by Whitney Webb? I don't have the details on that, so I couldn't really say. I think to me it is blatantly evident that Epstein didn't kill himself. There's no question to me at all that like you doubt it. It's just, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you look at that, come on, it's just so goddamn obvious, right? And I hope that someday that the answers come out and some people pay for what they've done, without a doubt. Okay, I think I've now covered every possible thing that will lead to this video being demonetized. So I think I'm going to call it a night there. Thank you everybody for watching. It's been very cool. Almost 2.5 hours. Shocking. We'll see when I do it again. I'll probably will, but I'll do it more if you guys share my videos and send me some of that cash for encouraging me. Currently smoking Italian Red Bark plus Argento Latacchia. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.